It had nothing to do with rations, but the longing to have things back to normal, to see the 3 boys home again, safe and well, and not to have to rely on heavily censored letters to get any news from them. "The rationing hasn't seemed to affect you that much, Dad," said Julie with a chuckle. "The buttons are still straining on that shirt." He grinned at her. "Less lip from you, my girl. I can't help it if I'm all muscle." "Muscle indeed," Flo snorted, swiping playfully at him with a scrap of tea towel. "It's the beer what makes them buttons pop." She turned to Julie. "Him and his mates drink gallons of the stuff down at the toolmaker's every night, but at least it fills him up so he don't notice how little there is on his plate when he comes home for his tea." She ran her hands over the faded wrap-round pinafore and gave it a tug. "I dread to think what would happen if that got rationed as well as everything else. A man needs a bit of pleasure after a hard day's work." Julie smiled lovingly at her mother. Nothing much got flowed down, and despite the endless bombing raids and the terrible fires that had raged through London only 2 weeks before, she still seemed full of energy and fun. "You sit down and put your feet up, Mum. I'll make the tea." Julie reached for the old brown teapot which had survived the seemingly endless bombing raids and carefully spooned in the used tea leaves her mother had left to dry on a saucer. The tea would be as weak as dishwater, with no milk or sugar to give it a boost, but it would be warm, and somehow they'd all become inured to it. "You're looking tired, Jules," said Flo, as she lit a cigarette. "That matron's working you too hard." "Nothing much I can do about that, Mum," said Julie cheerfully. "There's a shortage of doctors and nurses now they've enlisted, but that hasn't stopped the number of babies being born. I swear I've attended more births in the last year than ever before." Flo grinned through the curl of cigarette smoke. "It were the same in the last war," she replied. "We all thought the world was coming to an end, and the only comfort we had was when our men came home. How do you think I ended up with so many kids?" There was no real answer to this, so Julie concentrated on making the tea. It was funny, she thought, that she could spend her days and nights in the most intimate company of strangers, but she still found it embarrassing to talk about sex and babies with her mother. But nursing was all she'd ever wanted, a dream fulfilled only through her parents' sacrifices and her determination to break the barriers and have a career that until now had been thought of as middle class. Unlike so many of her colleagues, she decided not to enlist, but to stay in the East End and do her bit among the people she knew and understood, and give something back to the community who'd nurtured her. "I wonder how Eileen's getting on down in Cliffehaven," muttered Flo round the cigarette, the ash threatening to fall in her lap. "You ain't heard from her, I suppose?" Julie shook her head. "She wouldn't write to me, Mum. We never really got on, what with her being 12 years older." She saw the disappointment in Flo's face, and knew how much it must hurt to know your eldest daughter wanted nothing to do with her family, even in these dark times. "I'm sure she'll get in touch soon," she soothed, "especially after the latest firestorm we had in London." Flo sniffed, and tipped the ash in a saucer. Sticking the fag in the corner of her mouth, she picked up her knitting and determinedly changed the subject. "I'm surprised Stan ain't been round," she said, squinting through the smoke. "You two ain't fallen out, have you?" "Of course not." Julie put the cosy on the teapot and placed it on the table alongside the cups. Her smile was soft as she thought about Stanley Rudge, and the engagement ring he'd given her only 3 weeks before. Stan was big and brawny, with black hair, dark eyes, and a way of kissing her that made her legs go weak. "We went out dancing the other night. He's on duty at the police station today, that's all. I'll see him next week." "I don't see why you can't get married now instead of putting it off until he passes his sergeant's exams. We could all be dead tomorrow, and then where would you be?" Julie laughed. 6 foot under without a wedding ring. Flo took the fag out of her mouth and waggled a finger playfully at her daughter. "You know what I mean. I don't want no more little surprises, not after what we've been through with Franny." Julie handed round the teacups and glanced at the clock on the dresser. "Where's she got to, anyway? I thought she was only popping next door for a minute, and she's been at least half an hour. You know how she and that Ivy rabbit on. She'll be back soon enough, I wouldn't..."